The city pulsed with the restless energy of late afternoon. Horns blared as traffic pressed into the narrow streets, neon signs flickered against a hazy sky, and the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor mingled with exhaust fumes. Inside one of the wealthiest neighborhoods, where tall glass towers loomed like silent guardians of power, a man sat in the back seat of a sleek black Mercedes, staring absently through tinted windows. His name was Enrique Valença. To most of the city, he was the untouchable businessman who built an empire from finance and real estate. To his employees, he was feared, a man whose gaze could freeze mistakes into silence. But behind the reputation and polished suit, Enrique carried a private emptiness, a silence no board meeting could fill. He was a widower. His wife, Camila, had died 4 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving him alone to raise their daughter, Isabella, now 12. Despite his wealth, Enrique never knew how to replace what Camila once gave Isabella: softness, warmth, a sense of home. He provided tutors, nannies, expensive schools, but his daughter's eyes had grown colder with each year. That afternoon, after another exhausting day of decisions and contracts, Enrique asked his driver to take him straight to Isabella's school. As the car pulled up near the entrance, Enrique's sharp eyes caught a sight that jolted him. His daughter stood a few meters from the gate, her school uniform slightly wrinkled, her posture slumped. Beside her knelt a young man in a delivery jacket, his worn-out backpack resting against the pavement. He unwrapped a small container and offered her food, steaming rice with a fried egg on top. Enrique's heart pounded with disbelief. Why was his daughter accepting food from a stranger? Through the half-open window he could hear their voices. "Here, take it," the delivery man said, his tone gentle but firm. "You look like you haven't eaten all day. Don't worry about me. I'll get something later." Isabella's voice was barely audible. "Are you sure? It's yours." "I'm sure," the young man replied with a faint smile. "Besides, food tastes better when shared." Enrique's hands tightened into fists. He almost burst out of the car, ready to scold her, to pull her away from this stranger who had no business near her. Yet something in the delivery man's tone stopped him. It wasn't pity, it was respect. The driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. "Dr. Valença, should I step out?" Enrique didn't answer. He was frozen, watching. The delivery man looked no older than 22. His uniform bore the logo of a cheap app-based service, the kind Enrique never thought twice about. His face was sunburnt, his hair damp with sweat from a day on a motorcycle. Yet there was dignity in the way he offered his own meal without hesitation. For a moment, Enrique's world of glass towers and profits collided with the raw reality of someone else's struggle. He hated the feeling. It was like being pulled into a mirror he had avoided for years. Finally, Enrique opened the car door. The slam echoed across the sidewalk. "Isabella!" His voice was sharp, carrying the weight of command. His daughter flinched, quickly stepping back, but the delivery man rose calmly, squaring his shoulders. Their eyes met, two men from opposite worlds, one groomed in wealth, the other forged in hardship. Enrique's gaze was cold. "What do you think you're doing with my daughter?" The delivery man didn't flinch. "I saw she was hungry. I gave her my food, that's all." Isabella's voice trembled. "Dad, it's not—" "Silence," Enrique snapped, his tone harsher than he intended. But it wasn't just anger he felt. It was fear, fear that someone else had noticed what he had overlooked. His daughter's quiet hunger, not just for food, but for attention, for care. The delivery man picked up his worn backpack, preparing to leave. "I don't want trouble, sir." Enrique should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt a sharp pang, an uncomfortable awareness gnawing at him. This stranger had shown a kindness he himself had failed to give in weeks. As the young man turned away, Isabella's eyes followed him with a softness Enrique hadn't seen in years. And in that fleeting expression, Enrique realized something terrifying. His daughter trusted the kindness of a stranger more than the presence of her own father. The thought shook him to his core. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the delivery man disappear into the crowd until the sound of his daughter's fragile voice cut through the noise. "Dad, why are you always too late?" The words pierced deeper than any boardroom defeat, leaving Enrique speechless. And in that silence the story truly began. The evening traffic roared around them, but Enrique's world had gone strangely quiet after Isabella's question. "Why are you always too late?" The words echoed like a wound reopening. He gestured for her to get into the car, and she obeyed reluctantly, slipping inside with her backpack hugged tight against her chest. The ride home was heavy with silence. Enrique tried to focus on his phone, on the endless emails demanding his attention, but he could feel her eyes, disappointed, questioning, tired. When they reached the Valenza estate, a sprawling mansion with tall iron gates and manicured gardens, Isabella didn't wait for the driver to open her door. She simply slipped out and hurried inside without a word. Enrique lingered outside for a moment. He should have followed her, should have asked her what she meant, but his pride clamped down on his tongue. Instead, he walked into the marble foyer, the echo of his shoes bouncing off the high ceilings that somehow made the house feel emptier. Dinner that night was served by the staff, as always. Silver trays, crystal glasses, porcelain plates. But across the long dining table, Isabella merely pushed her food around with her fork. She didn't touch the steak, didn't sip the juice. Enrique noticed. Finally, he asked, "Why didn't you eat?" Her eyes flicked up to him, then away. "I wasn't hungry." But he knew the truth. He had seen her taking food from that delivery boy. Something inside him twisted uncomfortably. Guilt, maybe, though he refused to name it. After dinner, when she retreated to her room, Enrique found himself pacing in his study. His mind replayed the scene outside the school again and again. The stranger's face, tired but kind, the way his daughter's eyes had lit up, not for him, but for someone else's act of care. The next day, Enrique did something unusual. Instead of letting the driver drop him directly at his office, he asked to pass by Isabella's school again. The Mercedes pulled up to the corner just as the last bell rang. Students spilled out laughing, waving to parents, and there, leaning against his motorcycle, was the same delivery boy. His backpack was patched in several places, his helmet dangling from the handlebar. He looked exhausted but alert, scanning his phone for orders. Enrique felt a strange pull, an urge to step out and speak to him. But what would he say? "Thank you?" No, that wasn't Enrique's way. Confront him? That seemed unnecessary. He remained in the car, watching. Then it happened again. Isabella spotted the boy and hurried over, her face lighting up in a way Enrique hadn't seen in months. They exchanged a few words. The boy reached into his bag and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil, handing it to her with the same easy smile. Enrique's jaw tightened. His daughter was confiding in this stranger, a delivery boy, someone from an entirely different world. "Drive closer," Enrique ordered. The driver hesitated but obeyed, pulling the car alongside the sidewalk. Enrique stepped out, and this time both Isabella and the boy froze when they saw him. "Dad," Isabella whispered, guilt flickering across her face. Enrique ignored her and focused on the boy. "What's your name?" The young man straightened his shoulders. "Raphael, sir." "And what exactly do you think you're doing?" Raphael didn't look away. "She said she was hungry again. I had food, so I shared it, that's all." Enrique's tone sharpened. "Do you make a habit of approaching young girls outside their schools?" Raphael's jaw tensed. "No, sir. I make a habit of not letting people go hungry when I can help it." The blunt honesty caught Enrique off guard. He expected defensiveness, excuses, but not this quiet defiance. Isabella tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, stop. He's not doing anything wrong." Her voice carried a desperation that sliced through Enrique's anger. She was protecting him, the delivery boy, protecting Raphael. The air thickened. Enrique, the powerful businessman who could crush a competitor with a phone call, found himself uncomfortably out of place in front of this young man who owned nothing but a motorcycle and a patched backpack. Finally, Enrique said, "You stay away from my daughter." "Understood?" Raphael's eyes darkened, but he nodded. "If that's what you want, sir." Without another word, he put on his helmet and sped off into the traffic. Isabella turned on her father with rare boldness. "Why did you do that? He was just helping me." Enrique clenched his fists. "Because it's not his place to help you, it's mine." Her reply was like a knife. "Then why don't you?" The words struck him harder than any corporate betrayal ever had. For the first time in years, Enrique realized that money, houses, and tutors weren't enough. His daughter wasn't starving for food. She was starving for presence. That night, alone in his study again, Enrique poured himself a glass of whiskey he didn't touch. Instead, he stared at the amber liquid and whispered a question he had never dared to ask himself. Am I failing her? And somewhere across the city, in a cramped one-room apartment, Raphael set aside his empty dinner plate and thought of the girl at the school gate, wondering why someone with so much seemed to have so little. Two worlds had collided. Neither Enrique nor Raphael realized it yet, but their lives had already become entangled in ways that would change them forever. The following week brought rain that clung to the city like a heavy veil. Streets shimmered with puddles reflecting neon lights, and people hurried under umbrellas, rushing to escape the storm. Enrique sat in the back of his car once more, staring out at the grey blur of buildings. He had tried, in his own awkward way, to close the distance with Isabella since that confrontation with Raphael. He came home earlier, sat at the table during dinner, even asked about her day. But each attempt felt forced, rehearsed, like a man speaking lines in a language he had forgotten. Isabella answered with short words, distracted eyes, and long silences. And Enrique, though wounded, said nothing. He didn't know how to bridge the gap. That Friday, an incident shattered the fragile balance. When Enrique arrived at school to pick up Isabella, he found her standing by the gate with her hood pulled over her head, rain dripping from the edge. But she wasn't alone. Raphael stood beside her, holding his motorcycle helmet under one arm, his delivery jacket soaked through. He was shielding her from the rain with his own body. Enrique's chest tightened. He stepped out, anger burning beneath his calm exterior. "Isabella, get in the car." She hesitated, glancing at Raphael. "Dad, now." His voice was sharp enough to cut. Raphael's gaze locked onto Enrique's. "She was waiting out here alone. I just didn't want her to get sick." Enrique's jaw clenched. "And what were you planning to do next? Take her home on your motorcycle?" Raphael didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Isabella spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "At least he notices me, Dad." The words fell like thunder. Enrique felt the eyes of other parents nearby. Whispers rustled in the rain. He hated the humiliation, the image of his daughter standing closer to a delivery boy than to her own father. He grabbed Isabella's arm, guiding her to the car with a force that wasn't violent, but wasn't gentle either. She pulled away halfway, but finally slid into the back seat, slamming the door behind her. Enrique turned back to Raphael. "Stay away from her. This is your last warning." Raphael's voice carried steady conviction. "You can scare me, sir, but you can't erase the truth. She's lonely, and you don't even see it." Enrique's hand tightened on the car door, but he forced himself to remain silent. Engaging further would give the boy power he didn't deserve. Without another word, Enrique climbed into the car, signaling the driver to leave. Inside, the silence was unbearable. Isabella sat with her face turned to the window, rain streaking the glass. Finally, she whispered, "You can't control everything, Dad. You can't buy people's hearts." Enrique closed his eyes. Those words hurt more than any market loss, any hostile takeover. That night, Enrique retreated once again to his study. He poured whiskey he didn't drink, scrolled through financial reports he didn't read. All he saw was Raphael's defiance and his daughter's quiet rebellion. For the first time, Enrique wondered if wealth had become his prison. The following morning, unable to ignore the gnawing weight in his chest, Enrique instructed his driver to find Raphael. It wasn't difficult. A man like Raphael left digital trails, orders, routes, ratings. By noon, Enrique stood outside a small apartment building in one of the poorer districts. The paint on the walls was peeling, the stairwell smelled of damp concrete. He climbed to the third floor, knocked once, twice. Raphael answered the door in a faded t-shirt, surprised but not intimidated. "Mr. Valenza," he said flatly. Enrique scanned the modest apartment behind him, a single room with a mattress on the floor, a small stove, piles of textbooks stacked in the corner. He noticed the delivery bag drying on a chair. No luxuries, no excess, just survival. "I came to make something clear," Enrique said. "Stay away from my daughter. Whatever sympathy you think you're giving her, it ends now. I'll compensate you fairly." Raphael's jaw tightened. "You think everything has a price?" Enrique didn't flinch. "Doesn't it?" For a moment the storm outside rattled the thin window glass. Raphael took a deep breath. "Let me tell you something, sir. I lost my father when I was 15. My mum works double shifts at a factory. I know what it's like to grow up with a hole no money can fill. That girl, your daughter, she's carrying that same hole. And all I did was share a meal so she wouldn't feel invisible." The words struck deeper than Enrique expected. He masked the sting with coldness. "She is not your responsibility." "No," Raphael agreed, his eyes unwavering. "She's yours, so maybe start acting like it." Enrique left without another word. But as he stepped into the rain-soaked streets, the delivery boy's words followed him like an accusation he couldn't shake. That evening, Isabella refused to come down for dinner. Enrique stood outside her door, his hand hovering over the knob. He could hear faint music playing inside, a tune that sounded mournful. He wanted to knock, to tell her he was trying, that he didn't know how to fix what had broken between them. But pride once again silenced him. Instead, he whispered to the empty hallway, "I don't want to lose you too." Inside, Isabella sat on her bed clutching the foil wrapper from the sandwich Raphael had given her days earlier, as if it were proof that someone, somewhere, saw her. And so the lines were drawn. A powerful businessman, desperate to protect what he loved, and a delivery boy who had unknowingly become the mirror of everything Enrique feared about himself. The conflict had begun, and none of them could escape it. The days that followed were like walking through smoke, heavy, suffocating, unclear. Enrique noticed the change in Isabella immediately. She withdrew further into herself, her smiles rarer, her silences longer. At the dining table she picked at her food, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the crystal glasses and polished silver. Enrique tried to fix it in the only ways he knew. He called the chef and demanded Isabella's favorite meals. He bought her new books, gadgets, even arranged for her piano to be tuned. But none of it worked. She accepted the gifts with quiet politeness, then disappeared back into her room. One evening, after another strained dinner, Enrique stood at the balcony of his office, looking down at the glowing city. He had built everything below him, the skyscrapers, the luxury complexes, the towers of glass. Yet in the silence of his home, he felt powerless. For the first time in years, his empire felt useless. The breaking point came on a Monday afternoon. Enrique arrived at the school earlier than usual, determined to surprise Isabella, maybe take her for ice cream the way Camila used to. But instead of finding her waiting by the gate, he saw her across the street, climbing onto the back of Raphael's motorcycle. Time slowed. The rain-slicked pavement reflected the red glow of the traffic light. Isabella adjusted the helmet Raphael handed her, laughter breaking across her face in a way Enrique hadn't seen in years. "Stop the car!" Enrique's voice roared through the vehicle. The driver slammed the brakes, tires screeching. Enrique leapt out, his anger and fear colliding. "Isabella!" he shouted. She froze, guilt flashing in her eyes. But Raphael started the engine. "Don't you dare!" Henrique's voice cut through the street. "Get off that bike now!" Passers-by turned to watch. The scene was a spectacle. A billionaire in a tailored suit shouting at his daughter in the middle of the road. Isabella hesitated, torn between obedience and defiance. Then, slowly, she climbed off the bike, her hands trembling as she removed the helmet. Raphael looked at Henrique with quiet fury. "She was just tired of waiting," Raphael said. "I was giving her a ride, nothing more." Henrique's chest heaved. "You're finished," he hissed. "I'll make sure you never work another day in this city." Raphael's eyes hardened. "Do whatever you want. I don't need your world." "But she does need you, and you don't even see it." Henrique's hand twitched, almost ready to strike, but he stopped himself. Instead, he grabbed Isabella's wrist and pulled her toward the car. "Dad, stop!" she cried, her voice breaking. "You don't understand." But Henrique wasn't listening. His pride roared louder than her pleas. He shoved her into the car and slammed the door, his own reflection glaring back at him in the tinted glass. As the Mercedes pulled away, Raphael stood in the rain, fists clenched, watching them vanish. That night was unbearable. Isabella refused to eat. When Henrique tried to enter her room, she screamed, "Leave me alone!" and locked the door. Her voice cracked with tears, and Henrique froze outside, his chest aching. He wanted to break the door down, to hold her the way Camila once did, but he didn't know how. He was a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals, yet he couldn't negotiate his way into his daughter's heart. At midnight, Henrique found himself sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at Camila's photograph on the nightstand. Her smile was gentle, her eyes full of the warmth he could never replicate. He whispered into the darkness, "What would you do? How do I reach her?" But the silence offered no answers. Meanwhile, in his tiny apartment, Raphael lay awake as well. He replayed the confrontation again and again. He had seen Isabella's face, the desperation in her eyes. She didn't need luxury or protection. She needed someone to listen. And Raphael, for reasons he couldn't explain, couldn't let her suffer alone. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then set it down. He knew Henrique's threat was real. Men like Henrique controlled entire cities with a word. But Raphael also knew something else. If he turned his back, he'd be betraying not just Isabella, but also the boy he once was. The boy who had prayed for someone to notice his pain. The next morning, Henrique sat in his office, staring at spreadsheets and contracts that meant nothing. His assistant entered with a hesitant knock. "Sir, there's been a situation," she said. Henrique looked up sharply. "What kind of situation?" The assistant swallowed. "It's about your daughter. She didn't show up to class this morning. The school just called." For a moment, Henrique's world tilted. His hand gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. "Find her," he ordered. His voice was steady, but his heart thundered. And in that instant, every deal, every skyscraper, every number in his bank account meant nothing. There was only one thing that mattered. His daughter was missing. The walls of control he had built around his life were beginning to collapse. And the cracks were spreading fast. Henrique's pulse raced as he stormed out of his office, barking orders into his phone. His driver already had the car waiting, and within minutes the Mercedes was weaving through the streets like a black arrow. Rain streaked across the windshield, the city blurring into fragments of neon and shadow. Isabella missing. The words echoed louder than any boardroom collapse ever had. Henrique called the school again, demanded answers, but all they could tell him was that she hadn't shown up since morning roll call. No one had seen her leave the building. His chest tightened, his thoughts circling one dreadful possibility. Had she run away? 2 hours later, the car stopped in front of a familiar street. Henrique had insisted on searching personally, following a trail of faint clues and desperate instincts. He stepped out into the drizzle and stared at the cracked concrete stairs leading up to a third-floor apartment, Raphael's apartment. The door creaked open before he could even knock. There she was, Isabella, sitting cross-legged on Raphael's small mattress, a mug of hot tea cradled in her hands. She looked startled, guilty, but calmer than he had expected. Enrique's relief surged first, a wave so strong it almost knocked him to his knees. But quickly, anger rushed in to replace it. "What do you think you're doing?" his voice thundered, filling the tiny apartment. Isabella flinched, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I just needed space." "Space!" Enrique stepped inside, his presence overwhelming the cramped room. His suit and polished shoes looked grotesquely out of place against the peeling walls and cluttered shelves. He turned on Raphael. I told you to stay away." Raphael met his glare, unshaken. "And I told you. She's not invisible to me." "Dad, stop!" Isabella cried. Tears welled in her eyes as she stood between them. "You don't understand. You never understand." Enrique's voice cracked with frustration. "Then make me understand." Her words tumbled out like stones breaking a dam. "I feel alone all the time. Mom's gone and you're always busy or angry or tired. You don't see me, Dad. You see grades, appearances, schedules, but not me." Her chest heaved as she sobbed. "When Raphael talks to me, I feel like I exist. Do you know how long it's been since I felt that with you?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Enrique's face went pale. Each word from his daughter was a knife, carving deep into his pride. He turned away, unable to bear her gaze. Raphael broke the silence softly. "She doesn't need gifts or protection, Mr. Valença. She needs her father. That's all." Enrique's throat tightened. For years he had hidden behind wealth, behind control, behind the mask of a powerful man who always knew the answer. But here, in this bare room that smelled faintly of coffee and rain, he had none. He finally whispered, "I don't know how." Isabella blinked through her tears. "Then learn." The words hung between them, simple yet impossible. Later, after Raphael had stepped out to give them space, father and daughter sat side by side on the mattress. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the rain on the window. Enrique rubbed his face with tired hands. "When your mother died, something in me broke. I thought if I worked harder, built more, I could protect you. But instead, I built walls, and I trapped both of us inside." Isabella sniffled. "I don't need walls, Dad. I need you." Enrique turned to her then, really looked at her. The curve of her shoulders, the sadness in her eyes, the strength she didn't realize she carried. He saw Camilla in her, not just in her face, but in her courage to speak the truth. For the first time in years, Enrique pulled his daughter into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then melted into the embrace, sobbing into his chest. He held her tighter than he ever had, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, "for everything." She clung to him, and in that fragile moment, something long buried cracked open. It wasn't healed yet, not by far, but it was the beginning of something real. When Raphael returned, he found them still holding on to each other. He hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to stay or leave. Enrique looked up, his expression weary but different. "Softer. You've done more for her than I have in years," Enrique admitted quietly. "And that humbles me." Raphael shook his head. "She doesn't need me. She needs you." I was just filling the silence. Enrique nodded slowly, the truth pressing into him with undeniable weight. For the first time he saw Raphael not as a threat, but as a mirror, one that forced him to face the man he had become. And deep down, Enrique knew this confrontation had changed everything. His daughter had spoken the words he had most feared to hear, and now he could no longer run from them. That night, as Enrique drove Isabella home, she rested her head against the window, exhausted but calmer. He glanced at her in the dim light and felt something stir, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. But in the depths of his mind, a storm still brewed. Because admitting failure was only the first step. The real question was whether he had the courage to change, and change, he knew, was never without a cost. The following week moved like a fragile truce. Henrique tried in clumsy ways to change. He came home earlier, ate dinner with Isabella without staring at his phone, even asked about her drawings and school projects. She responded cautiously, testing the new rhythm like a bird, unsure if the cage door was truly open. But change never comes smoothly. The old Henrique, the one hardened by years of boardrooms and battles, still lingered. His temper flared when Isabella pushed boundaries. His pride snapped when she mentioned Raphael's name. And Raphael, despite promising to step back, couldn't help but hover near the edges of her life, checking that she was safe. The collision came sooner than anyone expected. It was a Saturday afternoon. Henrique had finally carved out time for Isabella, planning a rare outing. He suggested the art museum, a place Camila had loved, hoping the memory might bridge the distance. They arrived to find the grand halls buzzing with families and tourists. Isabella walked beside him, her steps hesitant, as if unsure whether to trust this new version of her father. For a brief moment, things felt almost normal. They stood before a painting of a stormy sea, and Henrique tried to explain the brushstrokes the way Camila once had. Isabella listened quietly, her eyes reflecting the restless waves. Then a voice cut through the gallery. "Isabella." Henrique stiffened. Raphael stood across the hall, holding a stack of delivery bags. He looked just as surprised to see them, but Isabella's face lit up instantly. "Raphael!" she exclaimed, running toward him. Henrique's stomach dropped. The moment shattered. "What are you doing here?" Henrique demanded, striding over. Raphael shifted the bags. "Weekend deliveries. The museum has events, lots of orders." Henrique's voice sharpened. "I told you to stay away." Before Raphael could reply, Isabella stepped between them. "Dad, stop. You don't own the whole city." He didn't do anything wrong. The tension in the gallery grew thick. Families nearby slowed, sensing the storm. Enrique's voice rose. "You think he cares about you? He's using you. People like him." He stopped himself, but the implication hung heavy. Raphael's eyes flashed. "People like me? You mean poor? The kind you step over on your way to the top?" The words struck like lightning. Isabella's face hardened. "Dad, is that really what you think?" Henrique faltered, realizing too late the poison in his own tone. His pride had betrayed him again, and this time in front of the one person he was trying hardest not to lose. Isabella's voice shook with rage. "You'll never get it. You don't see me, and now you insult the only person who does." Before Henrique could stop her, she turned and bolted through the gallery, weaving past startled visitors. "Isabella!" he called, panic surging. He started after her, but the crowd slowed him. By the time he reached the doors, she was gone, swallowed by the city beyond the museum steps. Rain had begun to fall again, a relentless rhythm against the pavement. Henrique stumbled out onto the street, scanning frantically. His chest heaved, fear clawing at him. He had lost her once today. He couldn't lose her again. Then, through the blur of rain and headlights, he saw her darting across the road, tears streaking her face. A car barreled down the street, its horn blaring. "Isabella!" Henrique's scream tore from his lungs, but before the vehicle could strike, Raphael was there, sprinting faster than Henrique had thought possible. He grabbed Isabella, yanking her back to the curb just as the car screeched past, spraying water in its wake. Henrique froze, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. His daughter clung to Raphael, sobbing into his chest. The sight tore him apart. Not because Raphael had saved her, but because he hadn't. For the first time in years, Henrique felt utterly powerless. His empire couldn't stop a single car. His pride couldn't shield his daughter from danger. And his walls, those iron walls of control, crumbled completely in that moment. He staggered forward, voice breaking. "Isabella, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She looked up at him through her tears, trembling. "Then prove it, Dad. Not with money, not with anger, with you." Enrique's knees gave way. Right there on the wet pavement, in front of strangers and traffic, the powerful businessman sank down and pulled his daughter into his arms. Raphael stepped back, giving them space. his own chest heaving from the adrenaline. For the first time, Henrique didn't care who was watching. He held Isabella as if the world could end any second, and maybe, in some way, his old world had. Later, when the three of them stood under the museum awning, soaked and shaken, Henrique turned to Raphael. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual authority. "You saved her life," he said quietly, "and you've shown me what I should have been all along." Raphael met his eyes, neither gloating nor humble, just steady. "She doesn't need a hero, sir. She just needs her father." Henrique nodded, his throat tight. "Then that's who I'll be." It was a vow, not of wealth or power, but of presence. The climax had come, and with it the breaking of an old man's pride. What remained was fragile, uncertain, but real. And for the first time in years, Henrique felt something close to hope. The city had a way of forgetting storms quickly. By Sunday morning, the streets glistened under soft sunlight, the chaos of the night before already washed away. But for Henrique, nothing would ever be the same again. He sat at the edge of Isabella's bed, watching her breathe peacefully in the early light. After the museum incident, after the near accident, she had cried herself to sleep in his arms. For hours, Henrique stayed by her side, brushing damp hair from her forehead, whispering apologies she was too exhausted to hear. Now, in the stillness of morning, he realized something profound. All the meetings, all the towers, all the millions, none of it meant a thing compared to this fragile girl who was his entire world. The changes began quietly. Henrique cancelled a major overseas trip, something his board found shocking. He told them, "My daughter needs me. The company can wait." For the first time in years, silence followed his words, not of fear, but of surprise. He adjusted his schedule, carving out mornings to eat breakfast with Isabella, afternoons to pick her up from school himself. The first time he appeared at the gate without the Mercedes, driving a modest SUV instead, the other parents whispered in disbelief. But Isabella noticed only one thing: her father was there. At home, the walls of the mansion slowly softened. Henrique invited Isabella's laughter back into the halls by asking her to teach him how to cook simple meals: pasta, scrambled eggs, even pancakes. The results were often disasters, but every burnt edge and crooked pancake made them both laugh until their sides hurt. For once, the house felt alive. And Raphael, Henrique found him again a week later, still delivering orders, still living in that small apartment. But this time, Henrique didn't come with threats. He came with gratitude. "You saved my daughter's life," Henrique said simply, "and you saved me from myself." Raphael shook his head. "I just did what anyone should." "Not anyone would have," Henrique replied. They stood in silence for a moment, two men from different worlds bound by one girl's laughter and tears. Finally, Henrique extended his hand. "If you ever need anything, school, work, opportunities, you'll find my door open, not as a debt, but as respect." Raphael hesitated, then shook his hand. "I don't need favors, sir, but thank you." From that day, Raphael became more than a delivery boy in Henrique's eyes. He was a reminder that dignity wasn't measured by wealth, and that kindness was often richest in the poorest hands. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation held. Isabella, once quiet and withdrawn, began to bloom again. She joined her school's art club, filled her sketchbooks with drawings, and even shared them with her father in the evenings. Henrique listened, really listened for the first time, asking questions not out of duty but out of genuine curiosity. One night, as they sat together in the study, Isabella showed him a drawing of 3 figures standing in the rain. One was tall, one young, and one wore a delivery jacket. The figures were holding hands. Henrique's throat tightened. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Isabella smiled softly. "It's us, the way I see it." Tears stung his eyes, but for once, he didn't hide them. He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She looked up at him with a gentleness that reminded him so much of Camilla. "You're here now, Dad. That's what matters." The empire Enrique had built still stood, but it no longer defined him. Board meetings ended earlier, investments took second place, and for the first time he learned how to say the word no to the world so he could say yes to his daughter. And in the quiet moments, when laughter echoed through the house, when Isabella dozed off on the couch beside him, when Rafael dropped by just to say hello, Enrique realized something Camilla had known all along. The measure of a man wasn't in the skyscrapers he built, but in the love he gave and received. On a crisp evening, months after everything had changed, Enrique stood on the balcony with Isabella at his side. The city stretched out before them, lights glittering like 1,000 promises. "Do you see all that?" Enrique asked, pointing to the skyline. She nodded. "It's beautiful." "It is," he agreed, "but none of it means anything without you." She leaned against him, her small hand slipping into his. "Then don't ever forget that." He smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "I won't. Not ever." And as the city breathed beneath them, Enrique knew the truth he had once resisted. The greatest empire he would ever build wasn't made of glass and steel. It was the bond between a father and his daughter, an empire of love that no storm could ever tear down.